Every losing trade you have ever placed was trying to tell you something. And the problem is not that you are losing. The problem is that you are losing and not listening. Most traders treat a loss like a punishment. But the traders who actually make it, the ones who are still here 5 and 10 years later, they treat every loss like a message. And today I am going to show you how to read that message. Because the traders who learn to do this stop repeating the same mistakes. And the traders who do not learn this keep losing the same money in the same way over and over again until they quit. Here is exactly what we are going to cover today. We are going to go through 3 specific things that every single loss is teaching you whether you realize it or not. We are going to talk about real traders, real situations, and the exact mindset and habit shifts that turn your losses from pure pain into actual progress. By the end of this video, you are going to look at your losing trades completely differently. You are going to stop dreading them and start using them. And that shift alone can change the entire direction of your trading. So stay with me because this is one of those videos that you are going to want to watch twice. Lesson 1. Every loss is telling you something about your entry. Let me tell you about Tyler. Tyler is 28 years old and lives in Phoenix, Arizona. He had been trading for about 7 months when he came across a setup that looked absolutely perfect to him. Everything he had studied seemed to line up. He felt that electric feeling in his chest that traders sometimes describe as certainty. He was completely convinced this trade was going to work. He put in his position and sat back feeling confident. The trade went against him almost immediately. Within a few hours, he was down $200. He held on because he was sure it would reverse. It did not reverse. By the end of the week, he had lost $450 on a single trade. He exited. He was frustrated, confused, and honestly a little angry. He told himself the market was rigged. He told himself his analysis was right, but the big players had pushed the price against him on purpose. He moved on to the next trade without ever really examining what had happened. And then it happened again. Different setup, different week, same result. He entered with confidence. The trade went against him. He held too long, and he took another big loss. After the third time this exact same sequence happened over about 2 months, Tyler finally stopped and asked himself a question he had been avoiding. What is actually wrong with how I am entering these trades? That question was the beginning of Tyler's real education. Here is what is happening psychologically when traders like Tyler keep losing on entries and never figure out why. The human brain has a very powerful mechanism called confirmation bias. It means your brain actively searches for information that supports what you already believe and automatically filters out information that contradicts it. When Tyler looked at a chart and felt certain about a trade, his brain was showing him all the things that supported his idea and hiding from him all the things that argued against it. He was not being stupid. He was being human. Every single person does this. It is wired into our biology. And the frustrating thing about confirmation bias is that it feels like clarity. When you are experiencing it, you do not feel confused or uncertain. You feel certain. You feel like you can see something others cannot see. That feeling of certainty is actually one of the biggest warning signs in trading, because real certainty in trading does not exist. The market does not care about your analysis. The market does not owe you a winning trade just because your setup looked clean. So why does this keep happening to Tyler and to so many traders just like him? Because after each loss, they focus on the outcome instead of the process. Tyler asked himself why the trade did not work, but he was asking it in a blaming way, blaming the market, blaming bad luck, blaming everything external. He was not asking it in a diagnostic way. He was not asking what specific decision he made at entry that put him in a bad position from the start. There is a massive difference between those two questions. One of them keeps you stuck. The other one moves you forward. What is the exact fix here? What did Tyler eventually do that changed his relationship with losing trades? Tyler started doing something very simple after every loss. He went back to the exact moment he decided to enter the trade, not the moment it went wrong, the moment he decided to get in. And he asked himself three very specific questions. First, what was my actual reason for entering at that exact price and that exact moment? Second, if I had to explain this entry to an experienced trader, could I do it in two clear sentences? Third, was I entering because the setup was genuinely there, or was I entering because I wanted the setup to be there? That third question is the most important one, because Tyler realized, when he was truly honest with himself, that many of his entries were not based on a setup actually being present. They were based on his desire for a setup to be present. There is a difference between seeing an opportunity and manufacturing an opportunity in your mind because you want to trade. Once Tyler started asking those three questions after every losing trade, something remarkable happened. He started catching himself before bad entries instead of just after them. He would be about to click buy, and then he would remember those questions. He would ask himself if he could explain this entry clearly. Sometimes he could. Sometimes he realized he could not. And on the days he could not explain it clearly, he did not take the trade. His loss rate did not drop to zero. No trader's does. But his losses became smaller and less frequent. And more importantly, when he did lose, he understood exactly why. He could point to the specific decision that led to the loss. That understanding gave him something to work with. It gave him a direction for improvement instead of just a feeling of frustration. Think about your own trading right now. Think about the last trade you lost. Can you go back to the exact moment you entered and tell me clearly, in two sentences, why you entered at that specific price, at that specific moment? Not in general terms. Specifically. If you can do that clearly, then your loss is teaching you something about market conditions or timing. If you cannot do that clearly, then your loss is teaching you something even more fundamental. It is telling you that your entry process needs to be more defined. It is telling you that you are trading on feeling rather than on a clear process. And that is incredibly valuable information if you are willing to hear it. Every loss that comes from a bad entry is not a punishment. It is a data point. It is the market's way of saying that particular decision at that particular moment was not sound. And if you collect enough of those data points and look at them honestly, patterns will emerge. You will start to see that certain types of entries consistently lead to losses. Certain conditions, certain times of day, certain emotional states you are in when you click the button. Those patterns are gold. They are the roadmap to a better entry process. But you can only see them if you are willing to look at your losses with curiosity instead of shame. Tyler eventually built a simple checklist for his entries based entirely on patterns he found in his losing trades. Not from a book, not from a YouTube video, from his own losses. That checklist became his most valuable trading tool because it was built from real data, his data, and it was designed to protect him from his own specific blind spots. Your losses are doing the same thing for you right now. They are building your personal roadmap. The only question is whether you are paying attention. Lesson 2. Every loss is telling you something about your emotions. Now let me tell you about Danielle. Danielle is 34 years old, and she lives in Nashville, Tennessee. She had been trading part-time for about a year alongside her regular job. She was actually a pretty good trader in terms of her knowledge. She understood the market reasonably well. She had a defined process. She had rules written down. But Danielle had a problem that her rules could not seem to fix. She kept breaking them, not on purpose, not recklessly. She would break her rules in moments where she felt a powerful emotional pull that overrode her logical thinking. And every single time she broke a rule, she lost money. Not sometimes. Every time. Her most repeated pattern looked like this. She would place a trade. The trade would start moving against her a little bit. Nothing dramatic, just normal market movement. But Danielle would start to feel anxious. Her stomach would tighten. She would start checking the price every few minutes. The anxiety would build. And then, before the trade had even reached her predetermined stop loss, she would close the trade manually to stop the discomfort she was feeling. Then, almost like clockwork, the trade would reverse and go in the direction she had originally predicted. The trade she had exited early for a small loss would have been a winning trade if she had just stayed in it, according to her plan. This happened to Danielle 11 times in 3 months. 11 times she exited a trade early because of anxiety. 11 trades that would have been winners. The losses were not huge individually, but together they cost her over $800 in missed gains and small losses that did not need to happen. Does this sound familiar? Have you ever exited a trade early and then watched it go exactly where you thought it would go? Here is the psychological truth behind what Danielle was experiencing. She was not dealing with a strategy problem. She was dealing with what psychologists call loss aversion combined with present bias. Loss aversion we talked about briefly before. It means the pain of a potential loss feels much stronger than the pleasure of a potential gain. Present bias means your brain gives far more weight to what is happening right now than to what is likely to happen in the future based on your analysis. So when Danielle was in that trade and it moved against her even slightly, her brain was screaming at her, "Get out now. Stop the pain now. Do not wait for what your analysis says will happen later." The right now pain felt unbearable. The future gain felt abstract and uncertain, and her brain chose the certain relief of exiting over the uncertain possibility of profit. This is not weakness. This is not a character flaw. This is the human brain doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was designed to prioritize immediate threat over future reward. That was great for our ancestors running from predators. It is terrible for trading. But here is where it gets really interesting. Danielle's losses were not just costing her money. They were teaching her something profoundly important about herself. They were showing her the exact emotional trigger that was sabotaging her results. And once you know your exact trigger, you can work with it. So what is the exact fix that Danielle applied? Danielle started keeping what she called an emotional trading log. This was separate from her regular trade journal. In her emotional log, she tracked not what happened in the market, but what she was feeling at every stage of a trade. She wrote down how she felt when she entered. She wrote down how she felt when the trade moved against her. She wrote down the physical sensations she noticed, the tight stomach, the urge to check the price constantly, the thoughts that came up. And she wrote down what emotion drove her final decision to exit. After 3 weeks of keeping this log, the pattern was undeniable. Every time she exited early, she had been experiencing the same sequence of feelings. A small movement against her would trigger mild anxiety. The mild anxiety would grow if she kept watching the price. The growing anxiety would eventually become unbearable, and she would exit. But when she looked at the trades she stayed in successfully, she noticed something different in her emotional log. On those trades, she had felt the initial anxiety too. But she had done something different. She had stepped away from her screen for a period of time after entering the trade. She had not watched every tick, and when she came back, the anxiety had passed and the trade was often moving in her favor. Danielle was not less emotional than other traders. She was actually quite emotional. But by tracking her emotions in her log, she discovered that her anxiety had a natural lifespan. If she did not feed it by watching the price every 2 minutes, it would peak and then fade on its own in about 20 to 30 minutes. And if she could get through that 20 to 30 minutes without acting on the anxiety, she could trust her original analysis to play out. So she made one rule change. After entering any trade, she would set her stop loss, step away from her computer for 30 minutes, and do something completely unrelated to trading. She would make a cup of coffee. She would go for a short walk. She would read something that had nothing to do with the market. She would let the anxiety peak and pass without feeding it. The results were dramatic. In the month after she implemented this rule, she only exited one trade early, one, compared to the 11 in the previous 3 months. And that one she exited because the market conditions had genuinely changed, not because of anxiety. Your losses from emotional decisions are doing the same thing for Danielle's losses did for her. They are showing you exactly where your emotional weak points are. They are pointing at the specific feeling that overrides your logic, and that specific feeling is your most important area of growth as a trader. What emotion shows up most often just before your worst trades? Is it anxiety like Danielle? Is it excitement? Is it the fear of missing out? Is it frustration after a previous loss making you want to recover quickly? Whatever it is, your losses are highlighting it every single time. The question is whether you are noticing it. Start your own emotional log today. Even just 2 or 3 words after each trade about how you were feeling when you made the decision. You do not need a complicated system. You just need enough information to start seeing your patterns. Because once you see the pattern, you can work with it. You can build rules around it the way Danielle did. You can protect yourself from your own emotional triggers before they cost you another dollar. Your emotions are not your enemy in trading. They are information. They are telling you something real about your psychological state and how that state is affecting your decisions. Every emotionally driven loss is the market's way of pointing at that information and saying, look here, this is where you need to grow. And growth in this area is worth more than any technical skill you could develop. Lesson 3. Every loss is telling you something about your patience now. Let me tell you about Kevin. Kevin is 25 years old and he lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. Kevin was, by his own description, an impatient person in general. He hated waiting. He hated uncertainty. He hated the feeling of being on the sidelines while something was happening without him. And that personality trait followed him directly into his trading. Kevin had a specific problem. He would identify a setup he liked. He would wait for it to develop. But then, right at the moment when he needed to be most patient, when the setup was almost but not quite fully formed, he would jump in early, just slightly early, not wildly early, just early enough to consistently put himself in a losing position before the trade had a real chance to work. He called it being proactive. His trading results called it something else entirely. Over a period of 4 months, Kevin analyzed his trade history and found that 41 of his losing trades had the same characteristic. He had entered before his own criteria were fully met, not a lot before, sometimes just a few minutes before the setup was complete, but early enough that the trade was starting from a weaker position than it should have been. Those 41 premature entries cost him collectively over $1,000. $1,000 lost, not because his setups were wrong, but because he could not wait for them to actually complete. Here is why this happens, and why it happens to so many traders who are otherwise quite thoughtful and analytical. There is a psychological concept called anticipatory anxiety. It is the discomfort your brain feels when something you want is almost about to happen but has not happened yet. The closer something gets to completion, the more intense the desire to just make it happen right now becomes. Think about the last time you were waiting for something you really wanted. A phone call back from someone important, a delivery you were excited about, a result you had been waiting for. Remember how uncomfortable the final stretch of waiting was. Remember how much you wanted to just skip to the moment it arrived? That is exactly what Kevin was feeling as his setups were forming. As the conditions got closer and closer to his criteria, his brain was flooding with anticipatory anxiety. The desire to just get in, to just start the trade, became overwhelming. And because the setup was almost there, his brain gave him a convincing reason to enter. It told him the setup was close enough. It told him he might miss it if he waited. It told him that entering just a little early was being decisive, not impatient. His brain was lying to him, and it was costing him $1,000 every 4 months. Does this happen to you? Do you ever find yourself entering a trade just slightly before your own criteria are fully met? Do you tell yourself you are being proactive when deep down you know you are just impatient? Here is the exact fix that Kevin used to address this problem. Kevin created what he called a confirmation rule. It was very simple. After he identified a setup he wanted to trade, he was required to set a specific price level that the market had to reach before he was allowed to enter, not a range, not approximately this price, an exact price. And he was not allowed to enter until the market traded at or beyond that price. This did one thing very powerfully. It removed his ability to negotiate with himself in the moment. There was no more almost there or close enough. Either the price had reached his level or it had not. Either he was allowed to trade or he was not. Binary, no gray area, no room for his impatient brain to manufacture a reason to jump in early. The first 2 weeks with this rule were uncomfortable for Kevin. There were setups that came close to his level, but never quite reached it. He had to sit on his hands and watch them. Some of those setups worked without him, and that stung. He felt like he had missed something by being disciplined. But here is the thing Kevin discovered after 4 weeks of following his confirmation rule. The setups that reached his level and then triggered his entry performed significantly better than the setups he had been jumping into early. Because reaching that level was itself a confirmation that the move he was anticipating had actually started. He was no longer guessing that the move was about to begin. He was entering after it had demonstrated it was beginning. His win rate improved. His average losing trade became smaller because his entries were cleaner. And perhaps most importantly, he stopped paying the tax of impatience. He stopped giving the market money just because he could not wait. Kevin told me something that I think is worth repeating here. He said waiting for confirmation does not mean you miss the trade. It means you trade the real version of it instead of the imaginary version of it. And the real version is almost always better than the imaginary version. Think about what your losses are showing you about your patience. When you look at your losing trades, how many of them involved you entering before your setup was fully ready? How many of them were based on what you thought was about to happen rather than what had actually happened? How many were imaginary versions of trades rather than real versions? If the answer is more than a few, your losses are pointing directly at a patience problem. And the fix is what Kevin used. Create a specific price or condition that must be met before you are allowed to enter. Make it non-negotiable. Make it binary. Either the condition is met or you do not trade. That rule will protect you from your own impatience more effectively than any amount of willpower ever could, because willpower runs out. Rules do not. Willpower is a resource that depletes throughout the day. By the afternoon, if you have been sitting in front of charts since the morning, your willpower to wait is going to be significantly lower than it was at 9 in the morning. But a binary rule does not get tired. It does not care what time it is. It does not care how long you have been waiting. Either the market met your condition or it did not. That consistency is what your patience problem needs. And your losses are telling you that right now. Every premature entry that turned into a loss is the market teaching you that the imaginary version of a trade is not worth trading. Only the real version is worth your capital. Kevin's trading did not become perfect after he implemented his confirmation rule. Trading is never perfect, but his premature entries dropped by over 70% in the following 4 months. And his overall account performance improved substantially because he was no longer bleeding money through the same preventable mistake over and over again. Your losses are trying to do the same thing for you that Kevin's losses did for him. They are trying to show you where your patience breaks down. They are trying to show you the specific moment in your process where impatience takes over from discipline. And if you are willing to look at them honestly, they will show you exactly what rule to build to protect yourself going forward. All right, let us bring everything together right now. We went through 3 big lessons today, and I want all 3 of them to stick with you. The first lesson was about your entries. Every loss that comes from a bad entry is showing you a gap in your entry process. It is showing you where confirmation bias is making you see trades that are not truly there. Use Tyler's approach. After every losing trade, go back to the exact moment you entered. Ask yourself if you could explain that entry clearly in 2 sentences. Ask yourself honestly whether you entered because the setup was there or because you wanted the setup to be there. That question will save you enormous amounts of money over time. The second lesson was about your emotions. Every loss driven by an emotional decision is showing you your specific psychological trigger. It is pointing at the exact feeling that overrides your logic at the worst possible moment. Use Danielle's approach. Start an emotional trading log. Track what you feel at every stage of a trade. Find your pattern. Then build a rule around it that protects you from that pattern before it costs you another dollar. Your emotions are not your enemy. They are your most important source of trading self-knowledge. The third lesson was about your patience. Every premature entry is your impatience speaking louder than your discipline. It is your brain telling you to grab the imaginary version of a trade instead of waiting for the real one. Use Kevin's approach. Create a specific binary confirmation condition for every trade. Either the market meets it or you do not trade. Remove the gray area. Remove the room for negotiation. Make patience automatic through structure instead of trying to force it through willpower alone. Here is the truth that ties all 3 of these together. A loss that teaches you nothing is the most expensive kind of loss there is. But a loss that teaches you something, even if it hurts, even if it stings, even if it sets your account back, that loss is an investment. It is paying for information that you can use for the rest of your trading career. The traders who succeed long-term are not the ones who lose less. They are the ones who learn more from every loss. They are the ones who treat each setback as a signal instead of a sentence. You are not behind because you are losing. You are exactly where you need to be if you are willing to listen to what your losses are saying. If this video helped you see your losses in a different way, hit that subscribe button right now, because next week we are going deep on something that trips up almost every trader at some point. And that is what to actually do when you are on a losing streak. Not how to think about it in theory, but the specific daily habits and mindset practices that stop a losing streak from becoming a trading crisis. That video is going to be a game changer. Subscribe so you do not miss it. I will see you next week.